Thank you. Well, good morning. Welcome to the White House. It is a pleasure to be here this morning because it's not every CEA report that gets a vice presidential unveiling. So we are feeling very special and very proud. And this report is on a topic that is particularly dear to the vice president's heart, the Recovery Act. He and his staff have played a crucial role in making sure that this top priority of the administration is implemented in the best way possible. The president routinely refers to him as Sheriff Joe because of the high standards he's set and the impeccable oversight that he has provided. And I like to think that our report today is a piece of that oversight. As part of the unprecedented transparency and accountability provisions of the Recovery Act, the Council of Economic Advisors provides a report to Congress about the effects of the Act each quarter. And this morning, I'd like to give you just a very brief overview of our report. We have hard copies for anyone who wants it, so you can read all of the details. Well, the first thing I want to talk about is the changing composition of the Recovery Act stimulus. You know, Congress designed the Recovery Act to both begin spending out quickly and to provide crucial support to the economy over a 2-year period. And with the Vice President's guidance, the Act has met and is continuing to meet these goals. Things like the state fiscal relief, the payments to seniors, the emergency unemployment insurance benefits, and the tax cuts all went into effect very quickly. The tax cuts all had some of their biggest impact, or people started to notice them most, in the first 2 quarters of this year during tax season, when most people got the concrete evidence in the form of reduced tax payments and increased refunds. And in previous CEA reports on the Recovery Act, we've highlighted the state fiscal relief provisions, the tax cuts, and the income support payments. But in today's quarterly report, we highlight the public investment spending in the Recovery Act. This is the project spending that not only creates jobs in the short run, but leaves us with an expanded and improved ability to create high-paying jobs in the future. You know, the Recovery Act includes some $319 billion of public investment in everything from basic infrastructure like roads and bridges to 21st century infrastructure like a smarter electrical grid and universal broadband. It invests in community health centers and health information technology, education and job training, what we call our human capital. And it makes unprecedented investments in basic scientific research to enhance innovation and help retain our competitive edge. Well, the public investment components of the Recovery Act were always expected to spend out more gradually because they typically require planning and are often awarded through a rigorous competitive process. But these outlays increased more than 50% between the first and second quarter of this year, which explains why the Vice President has been referring to this period as the summer of recovery, or I might even call it the summer of projects. In the area of transportation infrastructure alone, some 14,000 projects have already been awarded as of the first quarter of this year. Now, I agree. An innovative feature of the Recovery Act that we highlight in this report is its focus on partnering public investment with private and other funds. You know, much of the Recovery Act investment spending takes the form of matching grants, loan guarantees, interest subsidies, and tax incentives that support and encourage outside investment. For example, the 48C Advanced Energy Manufacturing Credit gives private firms that pass the Department of Energy's competitive process a 30% tax credit for their investment in factories to produce things like solar panels, wind turbines, and other clean energy products. The Broadband Initiatives Program provides grants and loans to firms and regional authorities to bring internet access to rural communities. And the Build America Bond Program subsidizes the interest cost of state and local government borrowing for schools, transportation, and other vital projects, so that these entities are encouraged to invest in the local infrastructure. Well, what the CEA's report does is to collect information from 15 agencies on the nature and the extent of those leverage provisions in the Recovery Act. We find that roughly $100 billion of Recovery Act funds use leverage, and that these provisions are encouraging co-investment in a wide range of areas. The greatest use of these innovative provisions are in the areas of clean energy, economic development, and building construction. And we estimate that the $100 billion in Recovery Act funds will partner with close to $300 billion of other funds, the majority of which are from the private sector. That is, $1 of Recovery Act funds is matched by almost $3 of other funds. All told, that $100 billion investment from the Recovery Act will support more than $380 billion of total investment spending. Now, a detailed examination of the incentives for wind energy production suggests that such leverage provisions can have a significant impact on private sector investment behavior. Thus, the Recovery Act appears to be stimulating private investment and job creation at a time when the economy needs it most. Now, in our report, we estimate the impact of the Recovery Act on job creation in two ways. One is a model-based approach, similar to that used by the Congressional Budget Office. This approach uses multiplier estimates based on the historical record to estimate how the Recovery Act's tax cuts and outlays to date likely translate into employment effects. The second approach that we use to estimate the employment impact does not depend on policy multipliers estimated from past history. Instead, it uses statistical procedures to project the likely path of employment based on the information available just through the first quarter of 2009, when the Recovery Act was passed. And then it compares the actual path of employment with that forecasted baseline. Well, the model-based approach indicates that the Recovery Act has raised employment relative to what it otherwise would have been by some 2.5 million jobs as of the second quarter of this year. Of these jobs saved or created, more than 800,000 is due to the public investment outlays that have occurred so far. The projection approach yields a substantially larger number. It suggests that the employment as of the second quarter is 3.6 million higher than it otherwise would have been. By this estimate, the Recovery Act has met the President's goal of saving or creating 3.5 million jobs 2 quarters earlier than anticipated. Now, importantly, a review of a wide range of other estimates outside the CEA, outside the administration, shows that our model-based estimate is very similar to outside experts. Our projection-based estimate is higher than some of the others, though very similar to the Congressional Budget Office's high-end estimate of 3.4 million jobs saved or created. Now, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty about any jobs estimate, and I suspect that the true effects of the Act will not be fully analyzed or fully appreciated for many years. But our compendium of outside estimates shows that respected analysts across the ideological spectrum, as well as the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, agree that the Act has had a significant beneficial effect on employment and output over the past year. Now, before I close, I wanted to take just 1 minute to thank the many members of the CEA staff who contributed to the study. I like to say that we are a small office that likes to do big reports, and this is one of our most ambitious. The amount of data that was collected, crunched, and then double and triple checked was simply enormous. We couldn't have done it without our amazing crop of summer interns that came in at just exactly the right moment. But thanks to the incredible skill, dedication, and good cheer of our team, as well as the support of the Vice President's amazing staff, we got it done. And I hope that people will have a chance to read it, because it really does tell a wonderful story of how well-designed and well-implemented policy can not only put people back to work, but can help to energize private investment. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn the podium over to not only the best vice president I could ever imagine, but the best friend the CEA has ever had. So, the Vice President of the United States.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you all very much. Look, one of the things is I was saying 2 things to Dr. Romer. One is that she is, of everyone in administration, and I've been here for 8 presidents, I can't think of anybody in the last 8 presidents' terms that has been able to take complicated economic data and explain it without talking down to people. And I have, as an economic historian that she has taken me to school, and I've appreciated it very, very much. Look, folks, the big question in everybody's mind, people who are have just gotten back to work, people who are uncertain about whether they'll stay at work, and most importantly, people who don't have work, is, are we heading in the right direction? Are the prescriptions we put forward in this administration taking the country in the right direction after having fallen off a cliff like it had for the last, not just the last year and a half or 2 years, but really the last 4 years, the direction it's been going? And so that's the question. And what we're all about today is not to say we have solved the problem. Over 8 million jobs were lost in this Great Recession. Over 8 million jobs. No one, including the people in the neighborhood I grew up in Claymont, Delaware, and in Mayfield, where I'm from, thinks we could solve it all in one time. But coming from a family where there were occasions when dads and uncles and aunts sat around the kitchen table wondering whether or not their job was going to be lost, and sometimes it was during economic crunch times. The question is there reason for people to be hopeful? And my argument is there is a lot more work to be done, but there's reason to be hopeful. As many of you know, when President Obama and I were elected, we were facing the toughest economic downturn since the Great Depression. I remember getting in a little bit of trouble, I was accused of hyperbole saying when I first started calling it the Great Recession. Well, I meant that in a literal sense. The greatest recession we've had, the worst recession we've had short of a depression in this country. I want to remind people of a few important facts, not to ascribe blame or responsibility, but just to understand where we were and how far we've come and how far we have to go. In the last 6 months of the Bush administration, 3 million jobs were lost. From June until January, 3 million jobs were lost in 2008 at the end of the Bush term. The fact of the matter is, before the President and I lowered our hands on that cold January day in front of 1 million expectant people, knowing things were tough and having hope that we could change it, that month, by January 20th, we had already lost 740,000 additional jobs. The GDP shrank, not expanded, in that first quarter that we inherited, 6.4%. And we inherited before we turned the lights on, not figuratively, literally, before we walked into the West Wing. We were handed a deficit, a bill, for that year for over $1 trillion. They're the facts. They're the facts. There used to be a program 100 years ago when I was a kid on TV with Walter Brennan. He said, "Ain't brag, ma'am, just fact." It's just factually. That's what we inherited. And we knew if we didn't act, and we didn't act boldly, the best estimates were telling us that we would lose another 4 to 5 million jobs immediate in that year. Well, we did act. And I stand before you today to say to you that not only the Recovery Act, which we're talking about here in this quarterly report to the Congress, but the economic initiatives we took, they are working. They are working. We went from losing 3 million jobs in the last 6 months of the Bush administration and 3.6 million or 3.7 million in the first 6 months we took office, inheriting a policy we could not possibly turn around before we could pass anything, to this first 6 months of this year, actually adding almost 600,000 private sector jobs. Long way to go. Long, long way to go. But over 6.7 million jobs have been lost in the last quarter of the last half of the Bush last year and the first half we came in before we could get anything really passed. We lost over 6 million jobs. And in the first quarter this year, as our policies are just kicking in, we have created this year, 2010, roughly 600,000 private sector jobs. The economy has been growing on the last 3 quarters at slightly over 4%. Folks, this is because of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in large part. As Dr. Romer explained, we are releasing a report today that says the GDP is between 2.7 and 3.2% higher because of one thing, the Recovery Act. Put it another way, we would be barely growing at all were it not to have passed in the first place and been implemented. We have created or retained, as Christy said, roughly, and you can argue about whether it's 2.6 or 3.5, but everyone now acknowledges there would be somewhere between 2.5 and 3.6 million fewer jobs available today, fewer people working today, were it not for the Recovery Act. And as pointed out, we have leveraged, taken off the sidelines, money that was not being invested, almost $300 billion from the outside. Over half of that, private sector, over $150 billion, private sector funding in education, clean energy, and infrastructure primarily. It was never going to be enough, if we get another thing straight here. In order to lead the world in the 21st century, no one that I know of thought it was sufficient to rebuild the economy of the 20th century. Let me say that again. I don't know any economist that thought we could lead the world in the 21st century economically without rebuilding something beyond the economy that collapsed in the first decade of this century. There are just not enough jobs to create by really just going back and taking the existing industry and rebuild. We want to rebuild what's able to be rebuilt, and we're doing that. But that is not sufficient. We need to create whole new industries. I wish we had time, because I'm not being solicitous. She's brilliant. I wish she could give you, in one of her classes that she used to teach, literally, an economic history of this country and how we've been through periods not dissimilar to this, and the only way out is creating something more than you inherited. Does anybody think we could lead the world in the 21st century the same energy policy we had going into this recession? Literally, I'm not being figurative, I'm being literal. Does anyone think we could possibly lead the world in the 21st century with the education policy we have, ranking 15th in the world in the percentage of population that graduates from college? My wife, who teaches full-time as a professor still, teaches 15 credits, she has a great saying. She said, any country that out-educates us will out-compete us. So folks, look, we need to rethink and transform what we do, what we make, and where it's made if we're going to lead in the 21st century. And the numbers I just announced aren't just numbers and abstractions, they're very real. This is about popping the hood of an electric car made by Fisker Automotive in Wilmington, Delaware, of a closed plant, a GM plant that had been there for 60 years, them investing over $1 billion in venture capital with a $426 million loan from the Fed, from the Energy Department, being able to check on your advanced battery, which is made by Dow Kokum in Midland, Michigan, an electric motor made by UQM in Longmont, Colorado, as you recharge your vehicle at an electric charging station in San Diego. Sounds corny, but think about it. Ultimately, this will save American drivers cash at the pump, save American economy from having to import billions of barrels of oil, and fundamentally allow us to alter our foreign policy, where we send $350 billion a year into the sands of the Arabian Peninsula and the jungles of Venezuela. People who aren't particularly crazy about us and our interest. It's about saving electricity by reading a smart electric meter made by a company named Itron, I-T-R-O-N, in Minnesota, and using electrical sources from wind turbines built by Siemens in Iowa, and installing solar panel system produced by Amex in Nevada and in Arizona, so that we can reach our stated goal of doubling our renewable energy generation by 2012. Not 2020, 2012. And all of this came from seed money. I love my Republican friends and those who think we're going the wrong way by saying this is big government spending, that the government is directing the economy, the government is. Look, folks, this all came from seed money and the vision of a president that sparked the imagination of the private sector, the true engineers of our economic future. Barack and I have no illusions. The only way back is through the free enterprise system in the private sector. But they were flat on the balls of their heels, as my uncle used to say, with very little prospects. When President Obama, what he did was remarkable. But in a sense, it was nothing really new. Imaginative presidents, Republican presidents, have sparked private sector ingenuity, which has sparked growth over the course of our entire history. In the middle of the Civil War, this is to remind people, you give them a frame of reference here, that this isn't big government spending. This is about getting the economy growing through seed money. In the middle of the Civil War, when there was no impact whatsoever on the outcome of the war by what was happening in Montana or in Idaho or in the state of Washington or Oregon or the Dakotas, what did what did Abraham Lincoln do? He pushed through and signed into law an act that established the Union Pacific Railroad Company. He said, Joe, what's that have to do with anything? Well, the idea was that the federal government provide initial funding for a company and for the start of a major transportation infrastructure project. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 called on the U.S. Treasury to issue bonds at $16,000 to a company for every 40 miles of railroad they built. $16,000 in the middle of the Civil War for every 40 miles the private companies built. And in doing so, today, after more than a century of private innovation, the Federal Railroad Administration manages over 200,000 miles of railroad track, and the railroad's value to the economy is over $350 billion a year. I'm not saying it would have never happened, but it would not have happened in the 1860s, 1870s, or 1880s. It all started with the federal government making a down payment. Private capital poured in, and the industries created that literally changed our way of life and grew this nation. Here's another Republican president, Eisenhower. And I have multiple examples. I won't bore you with them all. Just one more. Smaller scale. And by the way, Kathy Zoe's the one responsible for this. I gave her an assignment to go out and dig up all of these examples. In response to Sputnik, we launched something called the Advanced Research Project Agency. It was originally called ARPA. It's now called DARPA. It was created back in '58, as I said, by another Republican president. The goal of this new agency was to rejuvenate America's military research and development capabilities. In 1962, this outfit called ARPA launched a nationwide effort to build a computer network that they called ARPANET. By 1975, after spending $25 million of government money, ARPA researchers had done just that. They created a basic structure of the modern internet. In the 1980s, private industry dove in, and by 2009, the internet was being used by approximately 27% of the world's population, 1.8 billion people. It's become an incredible economic engine for hundreds of billions of dollars in commerce and countless numbers of jobs. What would happen had we not provided the seed money? It would have eventually happened, my guess. But it's a big deal. This was a relatively modest federal investment that allowed private industry to completely transform our economy, which is exactly what we're doing again. I was down in Kentucky a couple weeks ago visiting the General Electric plant in Louisville. Through the Recovery Act, we put up $2.3 billion, not for that company, but companies like GE, to manufacture component parts for a new green energy economy in the United States. Wouldn't it be ironic we went from being dependent upon foreign oil to be dependent upon renewable energy sources being made by and imported to the United States as the sole way in which we could get this renewable energy? So instead of importing from overseas, as a result, we're going to see from that investment $5.4 billion in private capital investment. We're also providing tax breaks to encourage Americans to purchase energy efficiency appliances, sparking the demand for the first new line of products GE has come up with on the appliance side. As a result, GE went out and invested, because of that act, and this is what they told us, they invested $600 million expanding that manufacturing facility to produce energy-efficient dishwashers, clothes dryers, and water heaters. They're not only creating more jobs in Louisville, they're not only creating them here in America, but as the CEO announced that day, they're actually bringing, I think the number was, 600 jobs from China to the United States. Isn't that novel? Isn't that novel? Ladies and gentlemen, who says we cannot compete? Where is it written that the United States of America cannot compete even in manufacturing? But it added to the payroll close to 1,000 people. And it's happening all across the country in different areas. As of last year, the USA only had 2 factories manufacturing batteries, producing new energy-efficient batteries. Only 2% of the world's supply, producing less than 2% of advanced batteries. These lithium-ion batteries run longer, provide more power, and work in a broader range of temperatures. By 2012, thanks in part to the investments we're making through the Recovery Act, we're going to grow that to 30 factories, the private sector is. And there's an outfit called A123 Energy in Detroit. It took a $249 million Recovery Act investment and leveraged it into $250 million in private funding. And because of companies like A123, in just 2 years, we're going to have a capacity to produce more than 20% of the world's advanced battery technology. By 2015, it will be 40% of the world's advanced battery technology. There's another example in Oregon. In 4 western states, they've been awarded $88 million grant from the Department of Energy for a regional smart grid demonstration project. Utilities and technology companies added another $90 billion of their own money, private capital, doubling our investment. So that $178 million project features 12 utilities and 15 test sites, and states estimate it's going to create or retain at least 1,500 jobs because of that investment. And on top of that, they'll be testing and developing brand new technologies. This is happening all throughout the Recovery Act. Just consider the following. $46 billion in clean energy funds alone is going to generate, as Christy pointed out, over $100 billion in additional investment in new energy projects. It's pretty simple, really. Once these companies see government jump into clean energy, they're much more confident about jumping in themselves. I give you multiple examples. The Dow facility, you can now go out on the market, and in a very short time, you're going to see this happening all over. You don't have to put solar panels on your house. They make a shingle that looks just like an asphalt shingle. You nail on your roof. It's a new breakthrough. It is energy efficient. It costs 30% more than a regular asphalt roof, less than a slate roof, and about what it costs you to put on a cedar shake roof. And the price will keep coming down, creating thousands of new jobs and saving an incredible amount of energy. With more private investment like this comes more innovation and growth, and most importantly, more jobs. These are good-paying jobs. These are not jobs that are going to be exported. These are jobs you can raise a family on. These are the jobs of the future, jobs that are going to create a nation that, in fact, is more energy efficient, a nation that protects the environment, a nation that builds things again, and builds them here in the United States again. And folks, let's be clear. None of this would have been possible if our friends on the other side, as my mother would say, God love them, our friends on the other side had gotten their way. They wouldn't have these investments. They would not have been able to leverage this private capital. What I find fascinating, and excuse the political interjection here, but our friends talk a big game about being pro-business. But they're fiercely opposed to providing tax breaks to companies like GE that is manufacturing the components for a clean energy future. They're opposed to loan guarantees to companies like Abound Solar Manufacturing, which expanded one Colorado plant and has opened a new one in Indiana that is going to create 1,500 permanent jobs. They're opposed to grants to companies like Dow Kokum, which is building an 800,000 square foot battery manufacturing facility, will supply 60,000 electric vehicles. And I know what they're against. The list goes on. I know what they're against, but I don't know what they're for. I mean that literally. I know what they're against, but what are they for? Look, all we're doing is just following a long tradition of presidents who have helped business invest, provided the seed money to get whole new industries going, creating not only jobs now, but jobs of the future. The other side has done everything in their power to keep this from happening. And just don't take my word for it. I just recently visited, actually a couple months ago, a company, an LED company in Durham, North Carolina called Cree. It is an LED lighting company, and this product is often manufactured abroad. And their CEO, an impressive guy, young guy, looked like he's in his late 30s or, was a young fella. He said, and I quote, "The Recovery Act funding made it a straightforward decision to continue to invest in the USA, both at our North Carolina facility and throughout our supply chain partners across the entire country." As Chuck said, it's pretty straightforward, folks. Government plants seeds, the private sector makes them grow, and we launch entire industries, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs of the future. And generally, what happens is we spark forms of commerce that heretofore were unimaginable. That's how we've led the world in the past. That's how we're going to dominate it again. It's going to start with new investments we're making and leveraging right now. But let me make it clear. The Recovery Act is not going to do it alone. It's private industry. It creates a virtuous cycle of investment at a time when no one was willing to take a chance. Presidents can't dictate economic outcomes, but they can set goals. They can spark the imagination of people. They can, in fact, generate a new sense of empowerment. They can, in fact, be a significant catalyst. I think the president has done that. The Recovery Act is a part of that. I think it's going to continue to grow, and I am absolutely confident we are moving in the right direction. Absolutely confident. I thank you all. I thank Christina and her entire staff, and thank my staff. If you get a chance, read the report. It's actually pretty interesting. Thank you all very, very much.